Okay, so why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah. My name is Vera Tamari. I'm a Palestinian artist. I live in Ramallah. My family originally comes from Jaffa, which is a coastal town on the sea of the Mediterranean. And my family moved out of Jaffa in 1948, and we settled here in Ramallah since then. And I haven't moved out of Ramallah. I mean, other than my visits, my studying abroad, which was in Beirut between 1962 and 66, and then a brief study in Italy, and another 2 years in England at Oxford University, where I did an MPhil degree. It's very hard to talk about myself, but I was fortunate to be raised in a family of art lovers. My parents were people who definitely appreciated art and taught us to appreciate art. And this was very unusual in a Palestinian family, because most families had to deal with their daily lives and problems, but it was a luxury, I think, for any family to deal with art. They exposed us to all sorts of cultural matters in music, in art, in painting, in literature. My father was a businessman, but he was a very sensitive person. He loved beautiful objects. He was even as a simple employee with the British government before 1948, he used to go to antique shops and buy objects and bring them home. So he sort of relayed this interest in art and objects to us. My mother, on the other hand, had more of an art training in the 20s, in the 30s, in the 20s probably, when she was still in high school, in a nun school in Jerusalem. She took 1 year after she graduated from high school to study art with a nun. And art and philosophy she did, which was also unusual for a young woman at that time. And then she studied, when she went back to Jaffa to her family, she took the correspondence course in drawing and painting with a school in France, in Paris. And she would send her homework to an assigned professor there, and he will send her back the new assignments each time with comments and things like that. And she established a little atelier in her house to do some crafts. Again, that was very unusual. She would do the craft for her own sake, for her friends, and then to sell for charity. I mean, to sell. My mother is the person who really influences most in one way, in that she always, as little children, whenever we went on a walk, she would draw attention to the beauty of nature around us, to little objects within the landscape, our immediate landscape, to color, to light, to the most beautiful things one can grow up with, and most people are unaware of. So we were very fortunate to have her as a guide to our artistic life. I have a brother, Vladimir, who's an artist. He's a painter. He lives in Japan. And he's the one, actually, after whom he's older than me. And as children, I always was following him and filling in some of his colors in his paintings. He would allow me sometimes to do that. But he inspired me most to become an artist. And then my sister Tanya also is a singer. She's not a career singer, but she does it professionally. She does classical singing, Arabic song composed to Arabic Palestinian poetry mostly. So we were in that kind of environment, and it made my brother, who was also very much interested in sciences as a physicist, leave his scientific academic training and go totally in the art world. So he is absolutely living by his, as an artist, as a thinker, as an artist, as an intellectual. I myself, when it came time to decide what I wanted to do in college, could think of nothing else but to do art. I mean, I wasn't particularly talented, or it wasn't as instinctive as it was with Vladimir, my brother. But I was so much involved in it, as in the family, and seeing my brother work, that I thought this would be the one of the things I would like to do most. So I did my first degree my first college degree in Beirut College for Women, and then I came back not having any particular direction in the art field. I mean, it was all a very, very general training. You got a little bit of painting and sculpture and graphic design, and so you come back and I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. But I went into a teacher's training center and started teaching art. I was maybe then 22 years old, and the girls were almost my age, a little younger, because they were training to become school teachers. And what happened is that the girls with whom I was working had absolutely no background in art, and in fact they resented becoming an art teachers, because this was forced on them. They were not very good with their high school grades, and they put the weakest girls, the girls who had the weakest averages, into the art section. So it was a struggle, but and a challenge. It was a challenge because I adopted a technique of teaching where I was very experimental in my approach. And at the time, I'm talking about the late 60s and early 70s, there wasn't much around for people to see, or to, as far as galleries or artists, or the art movement was still not very, very much developed. So I decided to do a very experimental approach and use that in my teaching, and that to give the chance for these girls to think imaginatively and creatively rather than copy and use a stale method of teaching. So that worked very well, and I was very pleased. I was very, very pleased with the results of these students who graduated as art teachers. Unfortunately, they were never employed as art teachers, because in the school systems here in Palestine then, the art class, which was in the syllabus, was never taught. And or if it had been taught, it would be taught in a very traditional way. I mean, they didn't see the importance of having a trained art teacher work with the children. So they ended up teaching any other subject, as maybe a bit of history, a bit of language, a bit of sports, I don't know, but never art. And that was very disconcerting for me, and I decided I needed something else other than just teach girls, which was very beautiful, and I grew a lot in that experience. And I decided to go to further my training. What helped me decide to go into doing work in ceramics was a workshop I attended in England. I can't remember exactly when. It was a 2-week workshop, and it was with highly professional people. And I signed up for the ceramics section, not knowing anything about clay, how to work with clay. I had never touched clay in my life. And it was so revealing, so beautiful. And the people there helped me a lot. I mean, there were big names of potters and ceramic artists in England, and world artists. And they were very humble and very friendly, and helped me a lot learn and get a passion for the material, for using clay. And then I came back and did a little more teaching, and then I decided to do more training in clay. And I went to Italy, to a place near Florence. It was an institute for ceramics, and I spent a year there. But the training there was more of industrial ceramics. It wasn't, you did get a feeling of how clay works, but it was all mostly geared how to produce clay works that are mass produced. And but that was just the basic training. I mean, I didn't want to involve myself in commercial ceramics. When I came back, I slowly started establishing a small workshop at home with no kiln to start with. I looked for places. I was the first, maybe, I don't like to say I was the first, but I was the first studio artist to do ceramics here in Palestine. There were other people in Jerusalem who were doing commercial pottery, glazed pottery in the tradition of the Ottoman ceramics with the very floral designs and glazed work. So I used their kilns there to fire my works. And eventually I bought my own kiln and I started teaching myself. I mean, really, I mean, the training in Italy was just very, very minimal. And I started putting up exhibitions that were very much appreciated by people. I mean, because this was a new thing to see pottery made, individual pots, and I was doing more thrown objects, pottery on the wheel, rather than sculptural pottery. And people loved that, to see vases, to see ashtrays, bowls, things that I made. Of course, I was not very, their comments or their compliments were much higher than the standard that I was achieving. I mean, it was a novelty, and people liked it as a novelty. And for me, it wasn't enough. I wanted to, so I kept experimenting and progressing in my works. The only drawback was that there was very little dialogue with people with whom I could share my work professionally, to talk about how to do glazes, how to fire properly, so it was, I felt a bit lonely in that. And I was alone in my workshop, I mean, day and night. I mean, I would work alone, and it wasn't like there was a community of artists doing the same things. And that took some time. I mean, it was very enjoyable. I loved working on the wheel. I loved the surprise that you get after you fire, the surprise whether it was a good surprise or a bad surprise. This had become a bit too lonely for me to be in my workshop day and night without any feedback. I thought maybe I ought to know more about how glazes, the origin of glazes in Islamic ceramics. I wanted to link it with something that was maybe familiar in the area, to link my training. So I couldn't find a practical program, but I went into Oxford and did a 2-year program in Islamic art and architecture, which had a section on ceramics, Islamic ceramics, but was mostly theoretical. And I did my thesis on a period of Islamic ceramics in the Abbasid period, 9th century ceramics. And I did a little bit of research on the composition of glazes and designs, and which was very nice. It was an eye-opener of how developed the ceramics of the region were, particularly in Iraq, Syria, Egypt, a little bit in Palestine. So
you were able to get the sort of the technical information as well as sort of
a little bit, yeah, a little bit of the technical information. I did some lab studies on composition and on the composition of the clays and the glazes. I went back to primary sources to find literature about how these clays were made during the Abbasid period in Baghdad and in Samarra. Now you hear about them all the time, these cities in Iraq, which were centers. And Basra, of course, and Basra, that was well known for its glass manufacturing, as a glass manufacturing center, and then eventually as a ceramic center. They were it was an amazing period to study, because it was very experimental at the time in Baghdad. They were getting a lot of influence from Chinese ceramics. There was a lot of commercial contact and exchange between the Abbasids and the Chinese. So it was a very rich period to study. And I came back to teach art history, Islamic art history at Birzeit University. And I didn't really employ the information I took on Islamic ceramics in my work. And I continued doing my own artwork on the side, doing ceramics and teaching art history, Islamic art history, architecture, which was very, very nice. I felt the importance of teaching Islamic art history to students here in college, university students here in Palestine, especially that there's very little known. I mean, you don't, in your development as a person, you don't get that kind of information. You know about the existence of the Dome of the Rock, but you don't know how it was done, how it was erected, how it was, what are the styles that influenced it. Then, as I was teaching, it was fascinating. I mean, to see the excitement in the eyes of my students, to see that I was bringing closer to them their pride in their own culture. And they did it with, they took the courses with such energy and interest that kept, I mean, even if I had to teach the class like 10 times, or the same course 10 times, it was always the new energy that stimulated me to teach it. Unfortunately, we stopped being able to go on field trips with my students, and now I have to teach about the Islamic monuments in Palestine through slides and through pictures. It's because of the closures and the barriers and the wall and all these difficulties of mobility, of being unable to go anywhere. So it's really very, very sad that we reached this stage, because I felt during the field trips it was so instructive. I mean, the students were able to see firsthand how the mosaics were done, the kind of calligraphy, the beautiful, the dimension of the architecture itself. I mean, to feel the space, to feel the beauty of the color, the mixture of techniques in decorating a monument like the Dome of the Rock, or other places, or going to the Khirbat al-Mafjar, Hisham Palace in Jericho. So it's sad actually that these monuments that are part of your own culture and history are so close. They're only about 10 minutes away by car, literally, practically, and we're not allowed to reach those places. And I was born in Jerusalem. I mean, my family came from Jaffa, but I and my sister and brother were born in Jerusalem, and I studied. My high school training was in Jerusalem, and I know Jerusalem so well. It's very much part of me, part of my soul, and I am now not allowed to go. It's been 6 years that I have been not been allowed to go into Jerusalem, as most Palestinians. I mean, I'm not an exemption. Most Palestinians cannot go except with a permit, which is rarely granted. So this is how the situation is. I mean, Jerusalem being the center of the culture of Palestine, really, it has been cut off from us. This other extra dimension, which is so important in the development in people's life and cultural growth, has been severed. It has been cut. So it's a very big part of us has been blocked because of this.
Let's go back just a little bit about Jaffa. You were born in Jerusalem. You were born after 48?
Before
48. Can you talk about the effect of that transition of being kicked out of Jaffa on your family, on your mother, on your father, on your brother, your sister? Your brother's older, is your sister also older?
Yeah.
And how you sort of assimilated them, of course on you, but like as somebody who's very sensitive and perceptive, like you probably saw it through them.
Yes.
Very
Okay.
clearly.
Okay. Yeah. To me, I mean, like I was saying, I mean, my parents came from Jaffa. I was born in Jerusalem. I lived all my life in Ramallah. But Jaffa to me my love for Jaffa came at a later stage in my life. It was after '67 when I went with my parents to visit Jaffa, when we were able to visit Jaffa, when there was the annexation and the occupation of the West Bank, Ramallah and Jerusalem and all the areas. So we were able to go back to our hometowns with my parents. I went with my parents to Jaffa for the first time in 1967, and it was a very strange visit. I mean, I couldn't understand then why they were laughing and crying at the same time. They would reminisce remember little locations and funny incidents that happened, like a white donkey kicking my mother when she was a child in that corner. I remember this. Or going to school with Abu Abdullah, the guy who worked with her father in the soap factory. He would take her to school every day with this multi-layered pot, the matba'iyya. Or remembering sad incidents happening in the family, going to the cemetery and seeing the different tombstones of family members. It was very, very strange for me at that time to accept that, to understand why these people, why my parents were having such excitement. Of course I could understand it like at face value, but I couldn't understand the great emotion behind it until much later, when I went to Jaffa later with visiting it with my mother and my friends. I remember the time when we went into my grandparents' house, where my mother took me there to see it, and she wanted to show me where her bedroom was. So we went. The house had been sectioned and occupied by many families, Jewish families and one Arab family. So we went into the section where the Arab family was, and they were very welcoming, and they let us in. Went through the garden, went into the house. She showed me the big hall, the beautiful arches. She told me there was a huge piano here. There were lovely paintings on the wall. This overlooked the garden. Where there was this kind of tree, I can't remember which tree. She started describing graphically what was around the environment she was brought up in. Then she wanted to lead me into her bedroom, and then that door had been blocked because that section of the house was occupied by another family. Then we went into another small room, and she said, "Oh my goodness, this is your grandfather's study." My grandfather was a very learned man. He knew Russian. He was like an official translation for the Russian consulate, translator for the Russian consulate in Jaffa, and he was a very religious man. She said she started describing that study as being full of icons on the wall, different icons. And when we went out, I said, "But I saw an icon on the wall," and I described it of being the Virgin Mary, sort of lying lying down, and all embroidered with beads, beaded work on the icon itself. She realized it must have been one of the original icons that we tried to retrieve it. We tried to ask to pay for it, but the family denied, saying that was theirs. It's been theirs for the last 25 years. So, in any case, so these are little memories about. And then going into the alleys, going into the old city, where my mother used to go and visit an old relative of hers. She showed me the little door that led to that place, now which has become an artist, is occupied by Israeli artists, oblivious to all the tradition and all the community life, and the different events that took place within the history of the family. the baptisms, the marriages, the deaths, the going to school every day, the routine, waking up to see a different light every day. I mean, this is part of what you have lost in leaving, in being forced to leave a place like that. So this trauma of leaving a place came to me. I was very small. I was maybe 2.5 years old or 3 years old when they left. But the trauma came to me later about how one could accept the fact that you have been forced to leave your family and your tradition and your house and your space, where for centuries and centuries your family had lived there, and your neighbors and friends. And I started thinking a lot about it. Whenever I went to Jaffa, I would go with feelings of great drive to go back, feeling very sad to be there, but at the same time fulfilled to be in those familiar corners that my parents, that were familiar to my family and my parents and grandparents and everybody in their life. So I did a couple of works, artworks, which had been inspired by this loss. One of this loss and this attachment to one of the works was a series of ceramic reliefs. I started at one stage. I shifted into doing more sculptural work and more expressive work rather than just bowls and pots and things like that. So now I'm doing that, and it was a series of sculptural reliefs inspired by old family photographs, of photographs taken in the 1920s, 30s, or 40s in Jaffa and Jerusalem, from pictures of family members, aunts and uncles, grandparents, little children, all grouped together in front of a camera, which was probably then a rarity. It wasn't very much used. My father used to be very very good amateur of photography, and he had a camera, and he loved taking pictures. So we have scores and scores and scores. We kept the pictures. Fortunately, they were able to keep the pictures, and this is very unusual. This is a link to your past and the community. And as a child, I grew up looking at these pictures and asking, who's this person, who's that person? Because all of these family members have been dispersed since the Nakba in 1948, all over the globe. Some are in Australia, some are in the States. Family members are in Lebanon, in Syria, in Egypt, in Europe. So all these people I've known come to know through the photographs, and I was always struck by the warm grouping of these people in their own natural settings, their own houses, their own communities. It's not like they are in a community which is distant from them, like if they had gone to Beirut. It would be a different kind of feeling. I mean, the houses are not built like in the same style as the houses were built in Jaffa, or your neighbors are not the same neighbors that you had in Jaffa or Jerusalem. So these pictures were the essence of Palestinian life to me, and I reproduced them in clay works, in clay reliefs, putting the figures and the grouping of the figures in terracotta, using little color, just a little color for the background, to give just the feeling of the atmosphere these people were. And these, I felt, were the strongest emotional work I've done. Emotionally, I felt fulfilled. I felt I felt like this is why I became an artist, in order to tell the story, maybe to tell a story, maybe I became an artist to understand through these photographs what my family had left behind. Like this series of family portraits, I also did another work, which I called Oracles from the Sea. I made about group of faces, maybe 14, 15 faces. They're like masks, but I consider them faces, and they're very classical in the rendering. They look like Greek masks, very dramatic, very full of tension in the expression. And I put these faces on rods, and I made it as an indoor installation, putting behind them three long panels of sequence photographs of sunset in the Sea of Jaffa. And I call this Oracles from the Sea because these faces seemed like they were my ancestors coming to tell of what they saw of Jaffa again after so many years of having been away or forced to be away from it. I actually took the faces to the beach when I could still go to Jaffa. Now I don't go there anymore, and I miss it a lot. I took these faces with me to the sea, and I planted them in the sand near to the waves. And it was an exceptional experience because there was a slight wind at the time, and the faces were moving on the metal rods. They were moving with the wind, and at the same time, through their pierced eyes and open mouths, they were open, hollow mouths. You could see the movement of the waves from behind, and with the sound, and it was too much. But I felt this was an act I needed to do. These my ancestors had come back to Jaffa, and they told their story in my work.
You took those pieces home with you at the end, or did you leave them at the sea?
No, just for 1 hour. It was amazing also that when I was doing the faces, I didn't have in mind anybody whom I had known. They were really very classical, with very classical features. But also the making of the faces was meaningful. I mean, the way they shaped themselves to the point when I decided, finish, khalas, this is it. This is the face that has to come out from this. It was an interesting process of work. These works were probably works that I think are a stepping stone for the work that I would continue to do, or from now on, things related to the turmoil in me, the questions that I have about particular situations, about I don't know exactly where I will go from here, because I'm very much now involved in teaching and establishing art projects at the University of Birzeit. But I think with these works are definitely works that have paved some kind of maturity in my art production. Before that, whatever relief, I did a lot of relief works in the earlier on when I was doing pottery, and I was doing relief works inspired by village life. And that was necessary for me. I mean, when I was a teacher, as I mentioned before, in the teacher training center, I made a special project for my students to come to know the crafts of Palestine. So we took like 2 months project. We started going into villages and camps, wherever you would find craftspeople, and study and record and document and come back and do works inspired by what they saw, whether it was clay or weaving or basketry or embroidery, to do it in a modern, with a modern and contemporary feel to it. I mean, so it was very instructive for me to learn about the crafts. But the most important thing was, I felt, for the first time, I felt my attachment to the landscape and the countryside, and I appreciated the genuine life of the peasants and their normal I mean, it's so natural, them being in that kind of setting, in their villages, doing their crafts, their seasonal life, crafts, how they did it every year, how they collected their materials, how they waited until for the clay to dry, or waited for the wheat to be collected in the summer, the wheat stems to do their basketry, or did their weaving in the summer when they could put out in the Hebron region, when they could put out their looms, their floor looms outside. It was very nice. I can still, I mean, that was also very instructive to me of how your body is involved in the work, the way they sat, these village women, and held the products they were doing. In the weaving in Hebron, there were 3 women at the loom, and they were all doing this rhythmical movement back and forth as they were threading in their I don't know what you call it, as they were weaving their rugs, their very bright rugs, or the spinning, how holding it with your thumb, holding one part with your thumb. And it was amazing. The village, the potter in Musa, in Sinjil, where we went, I learned a lot from the fact that how the process was a natural one. It wasn't a forced one. It wasn't a put on one, and that really impressed me. So I started doing these relief works that were very much inspired by the paysage, by the countryside in Palestine. I didn't do it because of political or reasons to prove an identity. It was a natural thing for me to do. It came at a time when everybody else was doing it to prove our identity as Palestinian artists through using the figure of the woman, and the embroidered dress, the way they were sitting together, doing different things. So my relief works were like a documentation of what I saw, of impressions I saw in the villages. And these were very popular, these reliefs. If I had an exhibition, they would sell like hotcakes. But there came a time when I couldn't, and it wasn't something that I wanted to do all my life. I mean, it was a phase, and I enjoyed doing that. So that when I started doing those relief works, which were inspired by my family photographs, then I started putting much more of myself into the work, and I felt a certain maturity has reached a level where I could go on doing other things. Now I'm doing stuff using different mediums. I use clay combined with photographs in installation pieces. Or I did a big installation work on that was 3 years ago on the crushed cars, the cars which had been crushed by the Israeli tanks as they came into Ramallah and made an incursion into Ramallah, violently crushing about 700 or 800 private cars which were parked near their houses or on the streets. So you saw like a cemetery of cars as you went into the streets after the incursion. It was very sad. So I wanted to make a statement with those cars, and I made an installation in a football field. I made a street, put the cars on it, polished these crushed cars. They looked like they came out from the factory, put some sound systems in the cars, radios, with anything that came on, news, music, Quran, chat shows, whatever it was. In each car it was a different station going on. So there was this mixture of sounds, and the cars were still on the road. Of course, they were not moving, but I called it going for a ride, as if they were. And there is a small video that was done by a friend of mine about the whole project and the crashing of cars with under the same name, going for a ride.
Was that a temporary installation, or did it stay there? a long time?
That installation stayed for 5 hours, because it wasn't meant to be a temporary installation. It was meant to be an installation that would stay for a month or two. But that same night, after the inauguration of the event, of putting these cars on the road, on the paved road, we paved a sort of a winding road in the football field, and big machinery, bringing winches, bringing in the cars. It was a whole event. That same night, after the people had left, and I left and went back home, there was a re-incursion into Ramallah, and a curfew was imposed. So what happened is that the only people who saw the installation were the soldiers going on the main road overlooking the playground, sitting in their turrets and sort of being surprised of what to see. Eventually, the tanks went into the playground and recrashed the cars. So it was an art piece in motion. I wrote once saying that the creators of that work were the Israeli soldiers. It went on. I mean, there was the recreators, because were the Israeli soldiers. I was merely a curator. The curfews, which we had in 2002, 2003, meant long days of being kept in your house, forced to stay in your house. Not being able to go out, to get food, to walk in the street, to meet people, to go to your work, meant long days of being like a prisoner in your own house. So being at home, being kept forced to stay at home for days at end, meant that you have to occupy yourself. Of course, my workshop was very near, just below my house, and I could sneak in between the different patrols of the tanks and the jeeps.
So the patrols were on the streets?
All the time. And it was very scary, because if they saw somebody, they would either shoot a rifle of bullets, or scream, or come down from, and it wasn't pleasant at all. So I would started doing these little olive trees made of clay, and it became like therapy for me to do very small miniature olive trees. In the process, I made over 600. I don't know how many I wanted to do, but I mean, I was doing more and more and more each day, and thinking about, with each olive tree that I was shaping, thinking about the olive trees which were brutally cut from the fields, Palestinian villages and fields and things like that. There were thousands and thousands of olive trees that had been cut over 2 or 3 years from the time that I was doing them, before that. And it wasn't the first time that I did something on olive trees. I did a lot of works, and I still do. I mean, olive trees is something that haunts me all throughout my career and my work. I love the shape of the olive tree. I feel it's like a human being. It has a soul. It has the contours of a human figure. And these olive trees date back to thousands of years. Some of them they date back to the time of Christ or earlier. They call them Roman trees because they date back to the Roman times. And you can tell the age. You can tell by the texture, by the bulbousness of the trunk, by the way they twist around because of the wind, or the way they're really very, very living trees, type of trees. And to know that these trees were being brutally cut from the bottom by the hundreds and thousands. This was by the Israeli soldiers and military authorities to first to punish Palestinians because they resisted occupation, maybe. Second, to punish because they knew that this was the livelihood of most Palestinian farmers who waited from season to season to pick their olives and make their oil and sell it and live by it. This is how most Palestinian villages lived. So to cut away their source of income in this brutal way, and this pained me a lot. And when I did these trees, I kept thinking. I said with each tree, became like a mantra in my mind. With each tree that I make, I'm recreating an olive tree. You know, I'm thinking of every olive tree that has been cut. With each tree that I make is for an olive tree that has been cut. I made these trees. Eventually, they became. It's a sad theme, but I installed them on a broad, very, very wide piece of thick plexiglass. So there was this kind of transparency to them and a spiritual air to them. They became like a field of olive trees. They're very small, but put next to each other, became like a field of olive trees or a crowd of people. And I colored them in the most candy-like colors because the theme was so heavy. I mean, and then I put above them. I put a picture of an old Roman olive tree set in plexiglass again. So the juxtaposition of the installation of small olives, colorful, in pinks and shades of pink and yellows and greens and purples, and then the stark black and white photograph of an old olive tree. This, I think, to me, the marriage between the two themes. I mean, these little olive trees may project hope for the future. I don't know. I mean, each one could decide. But this is, for me, it was important to do that piece at the time. And I still do work on olive trees. I draw olive trees all the time. I have in mind to do a big sort of things that hang from the ceiling on olive trees and women. I think the shape of the olive tree is very feminine. So I might do a work on the relationship between the olives and women. Being a woman and an artist, of what significance it is, I don't know. I mean, I sometimes don't want to carry this issue of gender too much because I consider myself primarily an artist and then a woman because I'm a woman. But I don't think of myself as a woman artist. There is a lot of emphasis on trying to separate issues of gender, of being a creative person and your gender. I've faced a lot of challenges being a woman and an artist in one sense only, because there had at the time when I was developing my artwork, there were very few women artists. I was one of the few in this milieu that was developing in the League of Palestinian Artists. I was one of the very few. There were like scores of men artists and 2 or 3 women artists. And I felt I didn't need to prove a point to these people, whether it was my personality, whether it was my artwork itself that imposed a certain kind of credibility. I didn't have to justify my being an artist or a woman. The only times I felt a bit distanced was when the artists would meet together. One tends to see that the male artists would socialize with each other and develop their plans together, and naturally not include you in their discussion, in their planning, because you are a woman living with your mother. They cannot. I mean, the tradition does not allow them to come in at any old time to visit you casually as they would do with each other. I felt a certain inner strength, and I was appreciated because of that, I think, because I was on par, on the same level as the male artists. I didn't have to struggle to find a place in an exhibition hall. I was always respected, and which was very nice. I mean, which is a reflection on how things work in general in open society as Ramallah is. I mean, I also must say that being in Ramallah is perhaps different than being an artist, a woman artist in Gaza or in Nablus, where it's more conventional and traditional, and there may be restrictions on what you can do, what you cannot do, where to go, where you don't go. I happen to be from a very liberal family that allowed us a lot of exchange between men and women, and I didn't have problems in having male friends come over to socialize or to have parties or to stay out late at night or to go to places together. I mean, my parents were very special in that sense, and I was fortunate to be brought up in this kind of environment. So maybe my position, I wouldn't be able to tell you nice stories about, or very sort of thrilling stories about I struggled because I'm a woman and I had to do works on feminist issues because I was repressed in my home. I didn't have that kind of background. My background was no, I'm telling you, my kind of background was very normal to be a woman. I'm as normal as in both. I mean, we had in my family the same kind of opportunities for my sister and myself and my brother. There was no discrimination at all. And this reflected on us as personalities later on. And this gave us the power to continue and to feel strong in a male-dominated society. And I feel like I've progressed without any kind of inhibitions or restrictions. I'm fortunate to be called on to be a member of cultural and art organizations, to be active. I'm very active in the community work here in Palestine. I always enjoy this part of my life. I find it's an important part of my life to be involved in community, developing cultural issues in Palestine. So I was a member of the Al-Wasiti Art Group. I was a member of Al-Sakakini Cultural Center of Riwaq, many different places. Now I'm trying to narrow down my participation because I need some time of my own.
That's actually very nice to hear about the sense of equality, that was promoted by the family, but also for the most part experienced within the art community.
Yeah. This question about hope for Palestine is very difficult, because at the moment you're asking me this question, what you feel and what you experience is a lot of tragedies, a lot of a thing that is totally against hope. I mean, you see people being killed daily on television, children. The houses are continuing to be demolished. There are attacks everywhere. The wall is being built. The wall that is separating me and Palestinians from our own hometowns and the extension of our life in Jaffa and Haifa and the thing that I was talking about earlier. I cannot see myself living in an enclave as Ramallah and Nablus and Bethlehem, being separated from one city to another, and separated from Jerusalem and the historical Palestine where we came from. I find this, no matter what kind of an arrangement, a political arrangement will come, there will have to be a kind of reconciliation between the peoples. The Jewish people have to accept the fact that they have imposed a historical tragedy on a whole people They have ousted them from their own homes. Once there's this kind of reconciliation about this acceptance of the fact, I think we will feel better about it. This is the only hope that I have. But to live in a society, in a country called Palestine, which is not really Palestine, it's a miniature of a country. It's a broken up, fragmented country. This is not any hope for me. I mean, my hope would be when the two peoples, we have to accept that Israel is there to stay, and the Israeli people are there to stay, but they can only stay, in my view, only if they accept that they have done a historical error, big error to a whole population of people. And this is my only hope for the future of Palestine. Otherwise, there will always be tension, there will always be violence, there will always be power struggles, political struggles. As long as there is subjugation of one country or one people to another people, there is no hope. There has to be a time when the two peoples can meet as equal on one same level, and not as occupier and the occupied. It will not work. I mean, any kind of peace talks or peace settlements that start from this kind of viewpoint will never work. The future holds for the children of Palestine, or what do I wish for the children of Palestine? My wish is for them to grow in as other children are growing in the rest of the world. Children who have potential to grow creatively, use their imagination, to be individuals with a lot of potential, that they can execute that potential and implement it, and that they will be individuals who will hold their heads high with pride of what they're doing, to be at peace with themselves, to be at peace with their family, with their community. The children these days live lives of adults and in Palestine, and I think this is one of the most criminal things that you can ask of a child to do, to be an adult before he can experience his childhood. So I would like them to grow normally and in childhood manner experience the delights of life, the meanings, the different meanings that every stage holds for a child as he grows.
Is there anything that you would say for them in terms of not so much your hope for them, but some lesson, some seed that you want to teach them about? And these are my words, not yours. About tolerance, about critical thinking, about everything that you want to enter, and not just to the Palestinian, but maybe to the children of the world.
To the children, I say, be honest. Be honest with your feelings, and do not be afraid to express them verbally, in your acts, in your daily life. You might confront difficulties because of your honesty, but that will give you much more strength than if you keep your honesty repressed and you keep and have to deal with life as lies. You have to be honest in dealing with your life. You have to be you have to learn how to enjoy looking at things, how to explore, how to discover. When you go out to your garden, look at the little ants, look at the little stones. Look carefully. I mean, it's not just looking. I mean, try to penetrate into that kind of existence and life. Take yourself away from your life into other people's life. I would like you to grow big in your experience and in your imagination.